In this video, I'll show you the basics of C# scripting. To understand how C# scripts work, you need to know three things: class, variable, and component. It's difficult to explain right away, so I'll show you through a simple example of moving a 3D object. First, create a cube and name it player. Selecting Reset in the player object's transform option will change all coordinates to 0. Next, create an empty game object and name it Manager Control. Create a script folder in the Project tab. Create a C# script and name it Manager Control as well. Drag the created Manager Control script and drop it on the Manager Control game object. With this, the script is ready to run in the game. Unity's C# script basically has a start and update method. The start method is executed only once when the script is started, and the update is executed every frame while the game is running. In this tutorial, we will create code that moves the player object when a specific key is pressed. First, let's put the player variable to move. In this example, we use the game object variable. You can use other variables, but we'll talk about them in the next tutorial. Private variables are only used within this script. We will cover public variables in the next tutorial. In the start method, put the code to find the player and enter it into a variable. There is a function that can be found using tags. But in this example, we will find the game object's name by searching it in the scene. Player equals game object dot find player. Since we only move the player in the X and Z directions, we will only use two float variables. Next, let's put the code in the update method. Move X equals input dot get axis horizontal. Move Z equals input dot get axis vertical. Horizontal and vertical used here are reserved variables and can be checked in project settings input. The arrow keys on the keyboard and the AWSD keys are assigned to variables. Now that the code to confirm the keystroke is complete, the next step is to move the player. In this example, we will use the translate command to move the player. To move the game object, you need to access the transform component first. Notice the .transform used after the player variable. The translate command requires coordinates in 3D space. The player's movement is in the X and Z directions, so let's leave Y at 0. Now that the coding is over, let's play it. It was successful to move the player, but the speed is too fast. Shall we reduce the movement speed? Let's multiply each variable used in translate by 0.25. When entering decimal or floating point values, don't forget the F at the end of the number. Check that the player moves at the desired speed. In today's tutorial, you saw how a C# script works. As I mentioned earlier, you have seen how the three elements to understand C# scripts, class, variables, and components work. Let's look at the script we just created again. We see there is the public class at the top level of the code block of a C# script. Take Toolbox as an example. The toolbox will contain a variety of tools such as a screwdriver, wrench, and hammer. These tools aren't usually in the kitchen. These tools are in the toolbox so you can find them and use them quickly. Class becomes toolbox, and tools become variables in class. In today's example, game object, float, and vector 3 variables are used. We will look at the use of various variables in the next tutorial. It seemed that the component access within the script wasn't being used, but you've seen code to access the player's transform component and make the game object move. All game objects in the scene have a transform component by default. Without the transform component, you can't know its position in 3D space. Understanding components will also be covered in the next tutorial. That's all for today's tutorial. Thank you. See you next time.